Hello and welcome to Steven's Automotive. What we have here is a 2016 Mazda CX-9, and in this video we are going to be replacing a valve cover gasket. We're also going to be doing belts, and we're also going to be doing spark plugs. These are going to be separate videos, so if you're interested in seeing how the spark plugs get replaced, go ahead and click here. If you want to watch just how the belts get replaced, go ahead and click here. And if you want to see how the valve cover gasket gets replaced, continue watching. Alright, let's move on to this. So let's talk about a 2016 CX-9 for a little bit. Modern cars nowadays have what is called a high pressure fuel pump. This high pressure fuel pump is located right underneath this cover. Alright, so just for full disclosure, I never done this particular valve cover gasket on this vehicle before. I never even done any type of work on a Mazda CX-9. So we're gonna go ahead and tackle it together. So let me bring the camera closer to you guys and show you exactly the steps that we're gonna be taking in order to do this job. Alright, so what we got going on here is we have a high pressure fuel pump, which usually sits on most modern vehicles. You'll see it sitting on top of the valve cover. Usually this is because it's driven by the camshaft. Mazda, I guess, decided to put it on the side on this particular model. So, it looks like it's a good thing, because usually when we have to do some type of work like that, we want to go ahead and remove that high pressure fuel pump. However, I do see this assembly right here. It looks like we're going to have to remove that. That's not a big deal as well. And then just eliminate this stuff out of the way, and our ignition coil's got to come out, and I think that's pretty much it. Perhaps just move this harness out the way, and we'll take a closer look and see what else is holding us on. So let's get started. We'll start out by disconnecting this one connector right here. It looks like this was already broken off from here. I guess that's not so much of a big deal, as long as whoever installed this back. Usually what I do is I put a little zip tie on there and try to hold it in place. We'll do that later, but as of now, let's worry about disconnecting this. It's a little tight. Okay. And then we got a little vacuum hose here. Okay, so I removed this hose right here, but what you have to make sure is that most of these hoses, for however long the vehicle is, they've never been removed before, so they become brittle with all the heat underneath this hood, right? So just be very careful that you don't, when you use whatever you're using to, to pry it off. I use a screwdriver and I just twist it a little bit and carefully pull up on it, because you may also break these valve covers. They're not made out of metal anymore, they're made out of plastic. Good quality plastic, but they could also break. So you want to be careful you don't break this little nipple right here where this goes into. So I pulled that off. I pulled part of the harness over here, and then I'm going to go ahead and continue with removing a lot of this stuff in the way. Okay, I'm going to remove this assembly, and I'm going to start by unbolting. These look like 8mm bolts. Looks like there's another bigger bolt over here. I think that may be a 10mm or a 12mm. Okay, so it's a 10mm. Here's a 10mm. I had previously removed a 10mm bolt from here, but looks like this could have just remained here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and put it back. Okay, there's another 10mm on the side over here in the back. Probably would have been a good idea to remove those first before removing the 8mm bolts that I removed from this assembly. So as you can see, as I'm trying to break them loose, this whole thing lifts up. But they're not so tight, so it's not
so big. For people that live out there in the rust areas, probably would be a good idea. All right, so you can see this whole assembly. It's pretty much ready to come off, but what's holding it on is, looks like these two hoses. So it looks like the best way to remove it, I usually like to remove them where hoses hook up to metal pipes rather than plastic. Even though it's high quality plastic, you still run into a chance, there's a bigger chance that you're gonna break that. So I'm gonna remove it from here. And what's this other one? Over here as well. All right, I'm gonna try to move them from here. Now one thing I like to do is I don't disconnect the coils if I don't have to, because then again, all this stuff has been here for so many years and it gets so hot, they just get so brittle. So if I don't have to unplug them, I don't touch them. Let's go ahead and remove the coils. Okay, now that I have my all my 4 bolts out, I'm gonna go proceed with removing or pulling the coils out individually. Okay, I apply a little bit of lubricant in here just so that it's easier to walk this hose off, because it's real tight in there. And there we go. All right, so now that I have my coils out, let's try to get this assembly completely out. All right, so folks, I'm gonna take a minute to talk about the beauty of this tool right here. This is actually used to pry interior door panel pieces, like for the A pillar, the B pillar, the C pillars, the panels that are underneath, on the side. This is mainly what this is used for, but this works great when it comes to separating hoses from tubes like this area right here. I can see also there's a harness over here that is clipped on. I'm gonna try to unclip it so that I have more slack over here, because that's what I'm gonna need to get this valve cover out. And let's bring the camera closer. Right here is where I wanna unclip that harness. I'm gonna pull this hose off, nice and easy. Toss that to the side. Okay. Okay, now let's work on this side. Just unclip here, disconnect here. Whatever sensor this is, maybe it's a camshaft position sensor. Okay. All right, so it looks like I don't have a lot of slack here for this harness to come this way so that I can pull the valve cover out. So what I see is this large bracket in here, and it's held down with one. So far, the only thing I see is 1 and 2 8mm bolts. So I'm gonna take that off. There's one. Here's the next one. Okay, here we go. A little bit more room here. All right, folks, I'm gonna take a bungee cord. I am going to wrap it around this so I could sort of hold this thing up, because it's getting annoying. It's getting pretty much in the way. Alright, so now that I took the 8mm bolts out of this hose bracket assembly over here, we can see that we have a lot more room, but we still need to get some of this area clear out before we tackle the valve cover. So what I see here is, I guess this is a fuel pressure, some kind of valve on the fuel pressure assembly, on the fuel pressure pump. I'm gonna disconnect it. And this is not your typical connector. I think you gotta slide the tab off or up. Okay, I'm gonna use a bungee cord and I'm gonna pull this towards the front of the vehicle so it's not in our way. And then it looks like we just have to maybe remove this and we'll see what else. I'm gonna remove these clamps on this hose and this hose. I'm gonna pull them back and then I'm gonna pull the hoses off. And then we should just be able to lift this thing up, pull it to the back, hold it, and we should have direct access to remove our valve cover. I'm gonna use one of these pliers. Okay, I can see that there's another small bracket, which I can see that the only job that it does is just holds this harness on here. It's held down by an 8mm, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove that. It's this one right here. And our coast looks somewhat clear. Still would like to somehow keep this out of the way. There we go. Looks like if you attempt this at home, your best friend is gonna be bungee cords. So invest in a good set of bungee cords. They come real handy. All right, folks, I tried to get as much slack as I could from this harness. I try to unclip everything that is clipped on so that it gives me more space to remove this valve cover. But it looks like if I continue over here, it's probably gonna give me maybe half an inch, at most an inch, if that. Because there's a piece of the harness that runs into the first O2 sensor, right? So I can't even unclip that because I don't see where it's connected. So I am going to remove the valve cover, and it's going to give us a little more trouble when installing it back in, but at this point it's just a gasket. It's not like you have to silicone anything on there with gasket maker, so therefore I'm not too worried. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed with removing the valve cover. These are all 10mm nuts, actually 10mm bolts. So let's go ahead and remove those right now. All right, folks, I have removed the valve cover. This is the valve cover gasket. This is what we're replacing. Okay. This is the back side of the valve cover. and you can see it was leaking. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it was leaking right over here, and it was leaking right on top of the exhaust shield. Therefore, it was causing like burning smell inside of the cabin or whatever. But at this point, all I'm gonna tell you is that it probably helps that you have a second person to hold this harness as you pull the valve cover, because I'm tackling this job myself, and all I have helping me is these bungee cords that I have to keep the hoses out of the way, this harness, that assembly over there with the bracket. But still, my biggest worry was over here. I struggle a lot in here because I have no slack. This is what I was mentioning before, that I have no slack here. So I'm gonna proceed with cleaning that surface area over there real well. Then I'm gonna clean this a little bit, and I'm gonna show you some areas here, some areas there where you also need to add some silicone gasket maker, and we should be able to put this back on there and start the installation process. All right, so this is what the area looks like after I remove the valve cover gasket. This was pretty much where it was leaking over here. I've already cleaned some of that area off, but I also wanted to show you that, let me get my camera to focus. Hang on one second. Okay, that area right over here, that's where you're gonna need, right here, silicone gasket maker. Also in the back area as well as this area over here. But you're also gonna need something to scrape that off, and this area over here as well. Yeah, you're gonna need something to scrape that off. Usually a good razor blade and some wire brushing will do the job. And then just clean it off real good before you install your new valve cover gasket. All right, so we're getting ready to install a valve cover. This is the factory valve cover gasket. This is the part number, and I'll leave it also in the description box just in case you're interested. All right, now that you saw me installing the gasket in place, I like to take a rubber mallet and just go over a little bit. Just tap it a little bit with a rubber mallet like this. Okay, just make sure it's seated properly. Usually I would do this on the bench, but just for the purpose of not moving the camera and the tripod, I'm doing it just like this, because you don't really need to put a lot of force into this. So I just wanted to show you on camera exactly what I do before I install it. All right, so now that we're getting ready to install our valve cover with our new valve cover gasket, I want to show you the area that I cleaned. This is what you want it to be like before you install your new valve cover gasket. So now I'm gonna add that silicone gasket maker in the areas where I showed you before. Okay, this is what I use, gasket seal. This actually is, I use this a lot for Toyotas and Lexuses, but it works just as well for any type of engines that's gonna need some kind of silicone gasket. Apply a little dab just on the corners where I showed you earlier. And usually these two areas that you can't see on camera are where your timing cover meets with the end portion of the cylinder head. That's where you want to add some of this. Okay, so this is what it looks like after I did it. You see that one portion right there, and then another one here, right there, and then right over there, and in the back as well. And now we're getting ready to install our new valve cover. All right, folks. As you watching the time lapse, it was a little bit challenging. The gasket came out on this corner over here, and it came out on this corner over here. At first, I tried to put it on that side first, but then I realized, wait, I should really tuck it underneath this harness, which doesn't give me much slack. So I should have started here. That was my mistake. I ended up switching to do it on this side first and then on that side. But even if I would have started here from the very beginning, I still think that that gasket would have came off of place. So I think no matter what you do, that gasket's gonna come out. Some folks add some silicone on inside the passages where the gasket stays or where the gasket sits so that the gasket doesn't come out. I guess that's a good approach to do on this situation, which is actually a good idea, but just make sure you don't overdo it too much. So now that I know that my valve cover is sitting properly, you will actually, by the way, you will actually feel it if it's not sitting there correctly, because you will feel like it's not sitting flush with the top of the cylinder head. So at that point, you just gotta lift it back up and see where it's coming. It has come off, and then you tuck that valve cover gasket back in place, and then go on from there. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna install all 14 10mm bolts, and pretty much our installation will be the same way we took it off, but this way it'll be just everything going in reverse. So let's get to it. All right, so the torque on the valve cover bolts is anywhere from 5 to 8 according to the repair manual. I don't have a 5 or even a torque wrench that goes down to 10 foot-pounds, so I'm just gonna do this by hand. In this case, I'm gonna do it with my electrical cordless wrench, and I have it at the lowest setting. 5 foot-pounds is really not that much. In this case, it's very important that you mostly focus on the sequence that you tighten this down, because you don't want to start here all the way down. Now you want to start in the center, so it applies most of the pressure in the center, and then it makes it easier on either end. All right, so now that we have our valve cover torqued down properly, everything is just pretty much ready to install back in reverse order. I'm gonna start with this hose and bracket deal over here, then move on to here, eventually drop this assembly down and torque it down. Let's not forget this hose that goes in here. And yeah, I'll just move on from there. If I get into any complications in the way, I will let you guys know, but I'm gonna put you back in a time lapse just so that you don't get bored watching me doing this. I just wanted to let you know that I had taken these 3 8mm bolts that hold down this assembly over here. I believe this is the EGR cooler. And I had taken it off because I believed that I was gonna have to move this back so that it could give me more slack with our harness here. But I did take it off, but it didn't do much. I wasn't going to get into the weeds here and unbolt that from here. I just found that unnecessary. So I'm gonna bolt these back up. But for you DIYers out there that are planning on doing this anytime soon, you don't need to do this. All right, so one thing I wanted to tell you, that in the back of the valve cover, there's this hose, right? I took it off from here, right? But this is a rare style clamp. Doesn't look like it's never supposed to come off. It looks like you're supposed to just replace this whole thing. So I just wanted to let you know that don't take it off from here like I did. take it off from this end, all right? Just pull it completely out, right? And then this stays with the valve cover, because now I'm having a hard time putting it back in there, but I'll get it in there. I just don't want you guys to go through the same trouble as I'm going through. Okay, so I finally was able to put that back hose on there after quite a struggle. What I ended up doing is I ended up getting rid of that clamp, this clamp right here, and I just put a clamp that you could squeeze to loosen or to widen or to open it. And you know, as you let go, it'll compress on there, it'll tighten on there. So that's what I ended up doing. But just remember, when you take off your valve cover, don't take it off from here, take it off from here. Pull it and it'll come right out. Alright, so I didn't want to make this video any longer than what it had to be. As you were able to see in the time lapse, I was able to reinstall everything back together. It was just pretty much putting everything carefully back on. And you do have to torque the valve cover in a sequence. I'll put those torque specs right up here on the side so you could use it as a reference in case you're doing this in the future or after watching this video. But you can see that residual gasket maker right here and in other areas like such. My camera could catch it. There's more right over here too, and also on the side over here, but I'm not going to try to get in there with the camera because it's going to be difficult to pinpoint it. This is totally fine. These are one of the telltale signs that the valve cover gasket has been replaced, because when it comes like this from the factory, you can see that the gasket maker is of a color that's gray, like you can see here where I'm pointing with my finger. They use that to reseal the timing cover onto the cylinder head. For example, if this car will be listed for sale, somebody else is looking at it, you could tell that the previous owner had the leaks taken care of and whatnot. But overall, it wasn't that bad of a job. I would say that the only challenge is to have this harness out of the way. Overall, I would say you could be in and out of this job as long as you don't run into any complications in about 2 to 2.5 hours. However, I do have mechanical background, so if you're the typical DIYer, just take your time. Remember what I said earlier. Set aside some time throughout your day to get on this job if it's your first time. It was my first time, and it took me quite a while, but also because I had to film, I had to do everything myself. Overall, if you want to go ahead and tackle this job yourself, I highly encourage you. Just remember that there are cars that are still 4-cylinder that's actually even harder, because I've done a few where I talked about this earlier, which is a high pressure fuel pump. It does sit on top of the valve cover on some of these cars, right? And some of the modern cars, I would say. And that's actually more of an additional step that you have to take. And it does take long because remember, you have to be careful. There's fuel lines going in there, and you want to take your time and disconnecting them. Some of these high pressure fuel pumps can generate over 3,000 psi. So it's something that you should probably not be messing with if you don't have the experience. So if you've done this job yourself before, go ahead and comment down below and let us know, for me and the viewer, what tips or advice you have that could possibly save some time, or maybe there's a better way to remove the valve cover and reinstall it without having to worry about getting this harness in the way. Anyways, I hope that this was very helpful. And if you're the typical DIYer, like to save money and like to take this approach, I highly encourage you to do it. I'll list the parts that I use down below. If you're a return subscriber, thank you for watching. If you're a new watcher, please consider subscribing. You'll see me in the next video, and best to you.